Hey, it's Chris Allingham with the Virtual Weber Bullet. Today I want to tell you how I'm using my electric oven to make better brisket. I've been cooking barbecue since 1997, and even back in the dark ages we knew that letting a brisket rest after cooking was a good idea. A lot of guys would wrap it in foil, add a little beef broth, wrap it up tight and throw it into an empty cooler and let it rest there for a couple of hours. That helped the brisket retain moisture. It also improved the perception of tenderness because that perception has a lot to do with how much moisture is in the meat. I've written an entire article on letting meat rest after cooking. I'll put a link to that in the description of the video. But long story short, what happens when you cook a large piece of meat is that the heat causes the muscle fibers in the meat to contract, and they force some of the liquid, the juices in the meat, out to the surface, and that's where you get drippings from. But some of that liquid is forced more toward the middle of the meat under pressure. If you cook that piece of meat, take it off the cooker on a cutting board and cut into it, you can literally get a flood of moisture across the cutting board. And I have personally experienced that in the early days of my barbecuing. Not a great experience. So if you let that meat rest for at least an hour, and preferably even 2 hours or perhaps even 4 hours, that pressure relaxes, the juices tend to redistribute, people say, within the meat, and you retain more of the moisture inside the brisket. At home, a lot of us these days are cooking brisket on the smoker to a certain point, maybe 160 to 170 degrees, and then we either wrap it in foil or we wrap it in pink or peach butcher paper and return it to the smoker until it finishes. So we've already got it wrapped, and at that point, many of us are putting it into an empty cooler to let it rest for a couple of hours. And anecdotal evidence is, in fact, that it does improve the result of that brisket. In a professional setting, like a barbecue restaurant, they use professional equipment to hold their brisket after cooking. Here's some photos of Franklin Barbecue in Austin, Texas. The very famous Aaron Franklin is down there cranking out hundreds of briskets a day. He cooks them overnight, and when they're done, sometime in the early morning, they're moved in their butcher paper out of the smoker, allowed to cool off a little bit at room temperature, and then they're moved into what's called a holding box or a hot box. In this photo that I took at Franklin Barbecue, you can see Aaron Franklin near the cutting station, and behind him is a silver box. In this photo, you see the box to his left with the blue sticker on the front. That is the hot box. In fact, that's called an alto-shaam. Alto-shaam is a brand name for a heat box, a holding box for food. It's often used by caterers. Some of these can actually cook food, not just keep it warm, but oftentimes in barbecue restaurants, they're simply used to keep barbecued meat warm. At Franklin Barbecue, they put their briskets in the hot box in the early morning, and they're held until 11 a.m. when they open up for service. Here's some pictures I took at Caldwell County Barbecue. This is in Gilbert, Arizona. And here I am with Pitmaster Jimmy. Jimmy was very kind to show me around the restaurant, and he allowed me to come into the kitchen where you can see to his right, there are a series of hot boxes keeping a lot of barbecued meats warm. Believe it or not, at Caldwell County Barbecue, they start cooking their briskets at 6 in the morning. They're done by 6 in the evening. They go into the hot box and they are held all night long until service the following day at 11 a.m. So they're held for 17 hours in the hot box. And at Caldwell, they're holding them at 170 degrees Fahrenheit. But I got to thinking, could I actually use my home oven like the hot box at Caldwell County Barbecue, or maybe like the hot box down at Franklin Barbecue? A lot of home ovens don't go below 170 degrees Fahrenheit. So I hooked up my ThermoWorks Signals probe thermometer, and I put a probe on the middle of the cooking rack in my oven, and I set it to the lowest temperature possible, which is 170 degrees. This is the graph that comes from the Signals barbecue thermometer. It tracks the temperature and charts it out over time. You can see here that the temperature went up to about 190 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 20 degrees over the set point of 170, and then it slowly ramped down well past 170, way down into the 140s. And then it began to wander up and down from the low 140s into the low or middle 150s. So I tried this when I cooked my last brisket. I wrapped it up in butcher paper, I moved it into the oven, set at 170. And you can see from this graph that the temperatures wandered up and down, still within the safety zone, within the 140s. Didn't go up as high as it did in my test run, but it stayed somewhere between 140 and 150 degrees, which is a food safe temperature. And I held the brisket for 4 hours. I mean, look at how moist and juicy it turned out. And to think that I could have held it for at least another 4 hours in the oven. I mean, try doing that in an empty cooler. So as it turns out for me, my oven can actually act like a hot box, even though maybe it's not meant to. You set it to 170, you'd think it should be running at 170, but it's actually running much lower than that temperature. It may be just an anomaly in the way it runs. I don't think it runs that far off when I'm up in normal baking temperatures in the 300s or into the 400s, but it has this anomaly at low temperature where you set it to 170 and it runs below that at a temperature that really does work as a hot box. So this might be something you want to check out on your own home oven. If you have a probe thermometer that can track temperature over time, set it up with the probe on the middle of the rack and turn your oven to the lowest setting possible and see what your oven actually does. Maybe you've got an oven that can work as a hot box too. Anyway, just wanted to share this finding with you. I think it's pretty interesting. Maybe you'll be able to take advantage of this. Maybe you won't. Maybe your oven is better than mine. I don't know. But I wanted to share it with you. Hope you find this information interesting. I want to thank you for watching my videos. I really appreciate you very much. If you like and subscribe, it helps everybody find them. Until next time, take care, everybody. Bye-bye.